Hey everyone, so just as an introduction, my name is Dr. Bryan Maxwell. I am an agricultural engineer and environmental research scientist here at the largest university in the state in Champaign-Urbana, where I'm also a community organizer on issues related to housing and anti-war advocacy. I spent most of my professional career working with farmers in rural communities all around the world, Illinois, North Carolina, Spain, New Zealand, helping farmers find solutions to improving sustainability of their farming systems. And most recently, I've been working in developing new next generation renewable technologies for helping us address climate change in really new and creative ways. So I'm going to address question 4 first, because I think this is one of the most important issues of this election. How do we win back the 6 million voters that we lost in the 2024 election? I want to make this point very clear. By almost every objective analysis of the 2024 election, the reason that Democrats lost the election to Donald Trump is because of the administration, the Biden-Harris administration's unconditional support for sending weapons to Israel to commit a genocide in Gaza. By almost every objective analysis, that is consistent with pre-election polling, where voters said that they would prefer the candidate who had a more humane policy. That is supported by post-election polling of the top reason that 2020 Biden voters stayed home in 2024. The top reason given was because of continued military support for Israel. And that's consistent with comments made by former Vice President Kamala Harris, who has admitted that this is likely the reason that cost them the election to Donald Trump. Biden was elected in 2020 because we had a broad coalition. His agenda appealed to a broad coalition of voters: Black voters, Latino voters, Muslim voters, progressives, young voters. It took a broad coalition to beat back Trump. That coalition was shattered in the 2024 election when millions of Americans saw their government doubling down on a policy of sending weapons to a country that was very clearly using them to commit crimes against humanity. By almost every objective analysis, this is why we lost the 2024 election. And I have zero doubt that that is why Ken Martin and the DNC have recently chosen to bury their autopsy of the 2024 election, because they know that there are still elected officials still standing behind that policy, and they know that it's opposed by over 90% of Democratic voters. And yet, there are elected officials in this Senate race in Illinois that still support that issue. Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton and Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy have explicitly said in interviews that if they were elected to the U.S. Senate, they would continue sending weapons to Israel. This is one of the most divisive issues of our party. It is one of the most consistent things I get asked about when I talk to voters. Congresswoman Robin Kelly is the only elected official in this race who has moved on this issue and who at least supports the Block the Bombs Act, ending offensive weapon sales to Israel. That is why, if I do not have your vote because of concerns about viability, electability, experience, I encourage voters to support Dr. Robin Kelly in this race, because she is the only elected official who is thinking about how do we rebuild this coalition of voters who we lost in the 2024 election. First question, would I approve of any of the judicial nominees of the Trump administration? No. I think that the time of Democrats playing nice with Republicans needs to be over. The Democratic Party has not adjusted its political strategies since the Tea Party takeover of the Republican Party. This is not our grandfather's Republican Party. This is a party that believes in power at all costs, not the well-being of Americans, not following rule of law, but power at all costs. We have seen what that's done with the drift of the Supreme Court over the last 10 years, where we've seen the Supreme Court roll back women's rights, roll back the Voting Rights Act, which was designed to prevent racist voter suppression. We've seen the Supreme Court recently allow racial profiling of U.S. citizens by immigration and law enforcement, and we need to be pushing back on this. The constant caving of the Democratic Party to Republicans has let the national discourse, our politics, drift further and further right, and we need to reassert power in Congress to take us back to a politics of decency, of rule of law, of treating human beings with compassion and dignity, and that is what I want to do as representative for Illinois in the U.S. Senate. Second question, my thoughts on supporting a guaranteed monthly minimum income. This is pretty complicated, and that's because I believe that the idea of a universal basic income is currently being weaponized by billionaires and corporations who are trying to further build out the AI technology, AI industry, and data center industry that's going to put millions of more Americans out of work and further concentrate wealth in the hands of a few in this country. And they are basically teasing us with this idea that only then will they support a universal basic income. I support universal access to basic needs for people in this country. That includes food, housing, and healthcare. We are not even doing that at this point. And that is because billionaires and corporations are blocking better access to social services in this country. I think until we at least get to the point where we're universally making sure that every American has access to healthy food, housing, and healthcare, then I think we can be talking about a minimum monthly income. We already have enough wealth in this country to provide these basic needs, but we're not doing it yet because we're letting billionaires and corporations control our politics and our economy. I support increased taxes on the wealthy and corporations. When I say the wealthy, I mean individuals with assets over $30 million. Increased taxes on the wealthy to afford direct payments to Americans making less than $60,000 a year and couples making less than $80,000 a year in order to address the affordability crisis, just like we did during the COVID pandemic, which I believe we are still in a public health crisis when it comes to affordability and Americans living paycheck to paycheck. I do support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I don't agree with immediately raising it to $25 an hour. I think that would be very disruptive, particularly to small businesses. I don't think we should be passing small businesses policy that primarily puts small businesses at a disadvantage when corporations already control so much of the economy and power and labor negotiating power in this country. I support these direct payments to Americans funded by larger taxes on the wealthy and corporations to address that affordability issue. I also support putting incentives in the corporate tax code to make corporations incentivized to pay their employees a higher minimum wage. We could be raising the corporate tax rate unless these corporations are willing to increase their minimum wage to $25 an hour. Most of low-wage workers in this country are employed by corporations. So putting these incentives into the corporate tax code, not the general universal policy across the economy, would incentivize corporations who already have accumulated much of the wealth in this country to better compensate their employees for what they're worth so that they're not living off of government subsidies like food and housing assistance. So what two committees would I sit on in the Senate that speak to my strengths and speak to the needs of the people of Illinois and the U.S.? The first that I would sit on is the Senate Committee for Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. I think as one of the only downstate representatives in this race, I think that we need downstate representation in the Senate to help bridge this partisan divide that a lot of communities are feeling in this state, particularly rural communities that don't feel like their interests are represented by Chicago area communities, Chicago politicians. We need to really reform our federal policy in the U.S. Department of Agriculture to subsidize and provide crop insurance programs to not just corn and soybean, which tend to have pretty high environmental impacts. We need to be incentivizing more diverse forms of farming, more sustainable forms of farming that are both economically more sustainable and environmentally more sustainable. But we also need to pass other policies that keep farmers' concerns in mind. Congress needs to have better control over tariff policy. We can't have someone like Trump coming in and disrupting trade markets that have taken farmers decades to develop. Congress needs to have a better say in tariffs. And we also need to be addressing the mental health crisis in farming and rural communities. Suicide rates for farmers are 3 to 4 times the national average. It is a public health crisis, and we need to be providing greater access to things like virtual mental health counseling services for farmers. Secondly, I would sit on the Foreign Relations Committee. Our country and the world is headed in a direction that is increasingly likely driven towards international conflict, and that is incredibly dangerous. And I don't think that we're taking that with the gravity that it deserves. I've been an anti-war advocate my whole life, and we need more anti-war voices in the Senate who are going to prioritize diplomacy over military intervention. Our military budget is over $1 trillion a year right now. We operate 700 military bases around the world, and we need to rein in defense spending and reappropriating this money into services that Americans desperately need: housing, roads, schools, clean energy, and other programs, access to healthy food. As an environmental research scientist, I can tell you without a doubt that there is zero chance of us adequately addressing climate change that does not involve fundamentally reshaping foreign policy. The U.S. military is the greatest institutional source of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. That is a fact. We operate over 700 military bases around the world, and it has a huge climate impact. We need to bring our troops home, and we need to bring our tax dollars home and invest it in things that Americans desperately need. How does Congress protect our vulnerable communities that are being targeted by the Trump administration? By stripping funding for these agencies and launching impeachment proceedings or investigations into the individuals responsible. We need to impeach or investigate Pam Bondi for threatening to sic the FBI on activists for trans rights or rights for the LGBTQ community. We need to impeach or investigate Kristi Noem for her lawless use of the Customs and Border Patrol that has led to the deaths of dozens around the country. Congress needs to launch investigations into Border Patrol agents that are employed under ICE and Greg Bovino, a criminal referral for Greg Bovino, and we need to strip ICE of its funding. This has become a lawless, rogue unaccountable federal agencies.